The lecture hall at the Galactic Military Academy buzzed with the usual pre-class chatter. 300 cadets from 47 different species filled the tiered seats, their conversations creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, whistles, and various forms of communication that the translator implants worked overtime to process. The building itself was a marvel of engineering, constructed from materials donated by member worlds and designed to accommodate everything from methane breathers to crystalline beings who absorbed nutrients through light. Cadet Vreshtala adjusted her sensory stalks as she settled into her seat. A Korathi, she stood nearly 8 feet tall when fully extended, with chitinous armor plating that marked her species as one of the most formidable warriors in the known galaxy. Her people had conquered 12 star systems before joining the Alliance, and military prowess was literally encoded in their genetic memory. She glanced at her datapad, reviewing the day's schedule with mild interest. Next to her sat Pelvar, a Tenthari whose species had evolved on a high-gravity world. His dense musculature and reinforced skeletal structure made him look like he was carved from stone. The Tenthari were known for their endurance and strength, capable of fighting for days without rest. He cracked his knuckles, a habit he'd picked up from watching too many human entertainment broadcasts. "Another tactical analysis lecture," Pelvar muttered, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the seats. "I hope this one is more interesting than last week. I nearly entered torpor listening to Commander Zaxtal drone on about supply line management." Vreshtala's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Supply lines win wars, Pelvar. Your people should know that better than most after the siege of Carathan Prime." Before Pelvar could respond, a hush fell over the auditorium. Instructor Quintel entered through the main doors, her 6 legs carrying her fluid form across the floor with practiced grace. The Yilkara were renowned as strategists and historians, their photographic memory and analytical minds making them ideal teachers of military doctrine. She reached the central podium, her eye clusters scanning the assembled students. "Good morning, cadets," she began, her voice carrying easily through the acoustically perfect chamber. "Today we continue our study of asymmetric warfare, focusing specifically on species combat capabilities and tactical doctrine. We will be examining case studies from recent conflicts to understand how different civilizations approach warfare based on their biological and cultural characteristics." The holographic display behind her flickered to life, showing star maps and battle diagrams. Vreshtala leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. This was the kind of material she'd come to the Academy to study. "Before we begin," Quintel continued, "I want to address something I've noticed in many of your tactical assessments. There seems to be a common misconception about one of our newer Alliance members, the humans of Earth." A ripple of reactions spread through the auditorium. Some cadets shifted uncomfortably, others exchanged knowing glances. The humans had only joined the Galactic Alliance 3 standard years ago, and they remained something of an enigma to most species. They were physically unremarkable compared to many warrior races, lacked natural armor or weapons, and came from a world that was considered moderately hazardous at best. Vreshtala had encountered a few humans during her time at the Academy. They were pleasant enough, if somewhat odd. They seemed to form emotional attachments with alarming speed, laughed at things that weren't obviously humorous, and had a bizarre tendency to adopt small animals as companions. She'd watched in bewilderment as a human cadet had spent 20 minutes cooing over a maintenance bot that had gotten stuck in a doorway. "Many of you have submitted tactical analyses that severely underestimate human combat effectiveness," Quintel stated flatly. "This is a dangerous error that I intend to correct today. To illustrate this point, I've invited a guest speaker." The side door opened, and a figure entered the lecture hall. He was human. That much was immediately obvious. He stood approximately 6 feet tall, with dark skin and close-cropped hair that was graying at the temples. He wore the standard Alliance military uniform, but the insignia on his collar marked him as a sergeant in the Earth Marine Corps. What caught everyone's attention, however, was the array of medals and commendations displayed on his chest. Vreshatala's tactical training kicked in automatically, identifying campaign ribbons from conflicts she recognized and several she didn't. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Chen," Quintel introduced. "He has served in the Earth military for 22 Earth years, with deployments in 16 different conflict zones both before and after Earth's contact with the Alliance. Sergeant Chen has agreed to answer your questions and provide insight into human military doctrine." Chen stepped up to the podium, his movements economical and precise. He swept his gaze across the assembled cadets, and Vreshtala felt something unexpected. There was a weight to his stare, an intensity that made her sensory stalks retract slightly. This wasn't the casual friendliness she'd come to associate with humans. This was something else entirely. "Thank you, Instructor Quintel," Chen said, his voice calm and measured. "I understand that many of you have questions about human military capabilities. I'm here to provide some context that might not be available in your standard curriculum." A Dracovian cadet in the third row raised a clawed appendage. The Dracovians were apex predators from a death world, standing 7 feet tall with natural weapons and a hunting instinct that made them fearsome soldiers. "Sergeant Chen, I mean no disrespect, but humans seem ill-equipped for modern warfare. Your species lacks natural armor, you have no enhanced sensory organs, and your physical strength is below average compared to most military species. How do you compensate for these deficiencies?" Chen's expression didn't change, but Vreshatala thought she detected the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. "That's a fair question, Cadet, and you're right that we don't have the natural advantages many species enjoy. But I'd like to challenge your assumption that these are deficiencies that need compensating for." He tapped a control on the podium, and the holographic display changed to show a rotating 3-dimensional model of a human. "Let me tell you about human physiology. We evolved on a world with a 24-hour day-night cycle, seasonal variations, and diverse environmental challenges. Our bodies adapted to be incredibly versatile. We can survive in temperature ranges that would kill most species. We can digest an enormous variety of foods. We can run for hours without stopping. A trait called persistence hunting that our ancestors used to literally chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion." Pelvar leaned over to Vreshtala and whispered, "Chase prey until it dies from exhaustion? That's horrifying." Chen continued, seeming to have heard the comment despite the distance. "But physical traits are only part of the equation. Let me ask you all a question. How many of you have studied the human concept of combined arms warfare?" A few hands went up hesitantly. Chen nodded. "Combined arms doctrine is the integration of different combat elements, infantry, armor, artillery, air support, intelligence assets, into a cohesive fighting force where each element supports and enhances the others. Humans have been refining this approach for thousands of years, long before we had modern technology." The display changed again, showing historical footage from Earth's various conflicts. Vreshtala watched, fascinated, as primitive human armies maneuvered across battlefields with surprising sophistication. They used terrain, coordinated attacks, employed deception and misdirection. "We learned warfare the hard way," Chen explained. "Humans have been fighting each other for our entire recorded history. We've developed, tested, and perfected tactics in conflicts spanning every environment on our planet. Desert warfare, jungle warfare, urban combat, mountain operations, Arctic survival tactics, naval engagements, aerial dogfights. By the time we reached space, We had accumulated thousands of years of institutional knowledge about how to fight and win battles. A Korathi cadet in the front row, her armor plates gleaming under the lights, raised a claw. But surely that experience is obsolete now. Modern warfare is conducted with energy weapons, shield technology, and spacecraft. Your historical conflicts were fought with crude kinetic weapons. Chen smiled, and it wasn't a particularly comforting expression. The tools change, cadet, but the principles remain the same. Let me give you an example. 3 months ago, Alliance forces were engaged in operations against pirate bases in the Kaleth Nebula. The pirates had fortified positions in the asteroid field, using the dense mineral deposits to mask their signatures and make targeted bombardment impossible. Standard Alliance doctrine called for a prolonged siege. Do you know how long the human contingent took to resolve the situation? Silence greeted his question. Chen let it hang for a moment before answering. 18 hours. We adapted a tactic from Earth's 20th century warfare called island hopping. Instead of attacking the main strongholds directly, we seized smaller outposts, using them as forward operating bases to leapfrog deeper into the asteroid field. We cut off supply lines, established overlapping fields of fire, and forced the pirates into an untenable position where they had to either surrender or starve. Reshatala's mind raced, analyzing the strategy. It was elegant in its simplicity, using mobility and logistics to achieve what firepower alone couldn't accomplish. But that requires extraordinary coordination, she said aloud, surprising herself. The timing would need to be perfect, and the troops would need to operate independently while maintaining the overall strategic objective. Chen turned his attention to her, and she felt the weight of his experience in that gaze. Exactly right, cadet. And that brings me to another aspect of human warfare. We call it mission-type tactics. Our soldiers are trained not just to follow orders, but to understand the commander's intent. If circumstances change, a human squad leader can adapt and improvise without waiting for new orders from command. Every human Marine is trained to think tactically, to understand not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it. The lecture hall was completely silent now. Every cadet was focused on Chen, the earlier casual attitude replaced with genuine attention. He had their respect, Reshatala realized, not through intimidation or impressive physical presence, but through demonstrated competence and knowledge. Let me share another human military concept with you, Chen continued. We have a saying, no plan survives contact with the enemy. It means that once a battle begins, chaos takes over. Things go wrong, communications fail, units get separated, unexpected obstacles appear. The side that wins isn't necessarily the one with the best plan. It's the one that adapts fastest when the plan falls apart. He paused, letting the words sink in. Human military training is designed around this reality. We train our soldiers to operate in degraded conditions, to make decisions under stress, to continue fighting even when everything has gone wrong. We drill endlessly on basic skills until they become automatic. We expose our troops to simulated combat stress so they learn to function when their adrenaline is pumping and their higher reasoning is compromised. A small Pixian cadet, whose species were renowned engineers but had little combat tradition, raised a tentative appendage. Sergeant Chen, if I may ask, what is your personal body count? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Reshatala saw several cadets shift uncomfortably. It was a blunt inquiry, the sort of thing most warriors wouldn't ask directly. Among her own people, combat kills were counted and celebrated, but she'd learned that many species found such discussions distasteful. Chen's expression remained neutral, but something changed in his posture. He became very still in a way that reminded Reshatala of a predator deciding whether to strike. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational. I don't know. The simple statement was somehow more chilling than any number could have been. "I've been in 16 major combat operations," Chen continued, his tone unchanged. "I've called in artillery strikes, coordinated air support, led assault teams, and engaged in direct combat. I've fought in 3 different wars on Earth and participated in 4 alliance operations against hostile forces. In some of those engagements, I was part of a larger unit where individual kills weren't tracked. In others, the situation was too chaotic to maintain an accurate count. I've fired weapons into crowds of enemy combatants. I've detonated charges that brought down buildings. I've piloted drones that struck targets from miles away." He paused, his eyes distant for a moment. "The human military doesn't encourage keeping personal tallies. We're not hunting for trophies. We complete missions. We achieve objectives. We protect our fellow soldiers. Whether I personally killed 5 enemies or 500 in a particular engagement is less important than whether we accomplished the mission and brought everyone home safely." The lecture hall remained silent. Vreshtala found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about humans. This wasn't some soft species that had stumbled into the galactic community through luck. These were warriors who had refined their craft over millennia of hard lessons. Chen straightened, his professional demeanor sliding back into place. "But I can tell you this. In my 22 years of service, I've never lost a squad member under my direct command. I've completed every mission I've been assigned, and I'm not exceptional among human Marines. I'm average. There are thousands of soldiers in the Earth military with similar records." Document 2. The weight of Sergeant Chen's words settled over the lecture hall like a heavy blanket. Vreshtala watched as her fellow cadets processed what they'd just heard. The casual dismissiveness she'd sensed earlier toward humans had evaporated entirely, replaced by something approaching genuine respect, or perhaps wariness. Instructor Quintel moved back to the center of the teaching area, her eye clusters reflecting the holographic displays. "Thank you, Sergeant Chen, for that introduction. Now I'd like to delve deeper into specific aspects of human military effectiveness. Cadets, you need to understand that humanity's approach to warfare is fundamentally different from most species in the Alliance." She manipulated the controls, and the display shifted to show comparative data charts. Most species develop military capabilities in response to external threats. The Korathi, for example, evolved their warrior culture to compete with other apex predators on their homeworld. The Tenthari developed their combat doctrine during the unification wars that brought their scattered colonies together. But humans are unique in that they have been in a state of near-constant warfare with themselves for their entire recorded history. A Velkir cadet, whose species were known for their diplomatic skills and had only developed a military out of necessity when they encountered hostile neighbors, raised a crystalline appendage. "Instructor, isn't that evidence of a deeply flawed civilization? Most species achieve some level of global unity before developing spaceflight capability. The fact that humans were still fighting each other even as they reached for the stars seems to indicate serious cultural problems." Chen stepped forward before Quintel could respond. "You're right that it indicates problems, Cadet. Humans are far from perfect. But there's a flip side to that coin. While other species were unified and at peace, focusing their energies on science and exploration, humans were learning hard lessons about conflict, strategy, and survival. We were pressure testing our tactics against opponents who were just as intelligent, just as creative, and just as desperate to win as we were." He tapped the control panel, bringing up a new image. It showed a detailed timeline of human military conflicts, stretching back thousands of years. The sheer density of the data was staggering. Vreshtala's tactical training allowed her to process information quickly, but even she was overwhelmed by the scope of it. "This is approximately 5,000 years of documented human warfare," Chen explained. "Each of these conflicts taught us something. The ancient Spartans taught us about discipline and training. The Mongolian hordes taught us about mobility and logistics. The Romans taught us about engineering and infrastructure. Napoleon taught us about corps-level organization and living off the land. The World Wars taught us about industrial-scale combat and combined arms. Vietnam taught us about counterinsurgency. The Middle Eastern conflicts taught us about asymmetric warfare and cultural intelligence. Pelvar leaned forward, his massive frame causing his seat to creak. But what good is all that historical knowledge against modern weapons? A single plasma cannon can level a battlefield. Orbital strikes can eliminate entire fortifications. Personal shields can stop most projectile weapons. Your ancient tactics seem irrelevant. Chen's slight smile returned. Let me tell you about the Battle of Kepler Station, which occurred about 6 months after Earth joined the Alliance. Pirates had seized a commercial station in neutral space, holding several thousand civilians hostage. They had Alliance-grade weapons, shield generators, and had fortified the station's critical systems. Alliance Command was preparing for a lengthy standoff, concerned about civilian casualties. The holographic display changed to show a three-dimensional model of a space station, with defensive positions marked in red. A human Special Forces team volunteered to resolve the situation. They spent 3 days studying the station's layout, analyzing the pirates' patrol patterns, and identifying weaknesses in their defensive setup. Then they executed what we call a hostage rescue operation, using tactics developed on Earth for similar scenarios. The model animated, showing small human figures moving through the station's corridors. The team inserted through a maintenance airlock that wasn't being monitored. They moved through ventilation systems. Yes, Cadet Vreshetala, I can see your sensory stalks retracting. We get that reaction a lot. They used sound suppressors on their weapons, eliminated sentries silently, and reached the central control room without raising an alarm. Once in position, they simultaneously struck at 6 different points, overwhelming the pirates before they could react or threaten the hostages. Vreshtala found her voice. That seems impossibly risky. If anything had gone wrong, the hostages could have been killed. You're absolutely right, Chen acknowledged. It was risky. But here's the thing. The human team had trained for exactly this kind of scenario hundreds of times. Every member knew their role perfectly. They'd rehearsed on a mock-up of the station layout. They'd drilled contingency plans for every conceivable problem. By the time they executed the operation, they'd already lived through it a dozen times in simulation. He paused, his expression becoming more serious. The operation took 17 minutes from insertion to securing all objectives. 0 hostages killed. 0 friendly casualties. All pirates either captured or neutralized. That's what human training and tactics can accomplish. Instructor Quintel added, and that brings us to a crucial point about human military philosophy. Sergeant Chen, would you explain the concept of force multipliers? Gladly, Chen replied. In human military thinking, a force multiplier is anything that increases the effectiveness of a fighting force without necessarily increasing its size. Technology is the obvious example. A soldier with a plasma rifle is more effective than one with a projectile weapon. But humans have identified dozens of other force multipliers that most species overlook. He began counting on his fingers. Training is a force multiplier. A well-trained soldier is worth 3 poorly trained ones. Intelligence is a force multiplier. Knowing where the enemy is and what they're doing is more valuable than raw firepower. Morale is a force multiplier. Soldiers who believe in their mission and trust their leaders fight more effectively. Logistics is a force multiplier. An army that's well supplied can keep fighting when others would have to withdraw. Leadership is a force multiplier. Good officers make better decisions and inspire their troops to perform beyond their normal capabilities. The holographic display now showed a complex diagram illustrating these concepts and how they interrelated. Vreshtala studied it intently, her mind working to integrate this new perspective with her existing tactical knowledge. A Graxian cadet, whose species had evolved as hive-minded collective, projected its question through the translator system. This emphasis on individual initiative and small unit leadership seems inefficient. In Graxian military doctrine, all units operate in perfect coordination, receiving instructions from the Central Command Intelligence. There is no confusion, no miscommunication, and no individuals making potentially incorrect decisions. Chen nodded respectfully. I've studied Graxian military doctrine, and it's impressive in its efficiency. But it has a critical vulnerability. What happens when your central command is disrupted? If communications are jammed or your command ship is destroyed, how do your forces adapt? The Graxian cadet was silent for a moment, processing. Our redundant systems make such scenarios unlikely. Unlikely, but not impossible, Chen countered. And that's the difference. Human military doctrine assumes that something will go wrong. We plan for our communications to fail, for our command structure to be disrupted, for our carefully prepared strategies to fall apart. Every human soldier, from the newest private to the most senior general, is trained to operate independently if necessary. We call it distributed leadership. Push decision-making authority down to the lowest level capable of making informed decisions. He pulled up footage from what appeared to be a training exercise. Vreshtala watched as a small team of human marines encountered an unexpected obstacle in their mission. Rather than halting to request new orders, the team leader assessed the situation, conferred briefly with his team, and adapted their approach on the spot. The exercise continued with barely a pause in momentum. This kind of thinking doesn't come naturally to most species, Quintel interjected. It requires a delicate balance. Soldiers who can follow orders when necessary, but also think independently when circumstances change. It demands extensive training and a very specific command culture. But when properly implemented, it creates a military force that is remarkably resilient and adaptive. Pelvar spoke up again, his deep voice rumbling through the hall. I still struggle to understand how this compensates for physical limitations. My people can fight for days without rest. We can carry equipment that would crush a human. We can survive injuries that would be immediately fatal to most species. How do humans overcome these disadvantages in actual combat? Chen's expression grew contemplative. You're asking the wrong question, Cadet. You're assuming that physical strength and endurance are the primary determinants of combat effectiveness. Let me ask you this. In your military history, how often has the physically stronger side lost a conflict? Pelvar considered this. It happens sometimes, but usually due to overwhelming numbers on the opposing side or significant technological advantages. Now let me tell you about the American Revolutionary War, Chen said, pulling up historical data. In the late 18th century, a group of colonial farmers and merchants decided to rebel against the British Empire, which at that time had the most powerful military in the world. The British had professional soldiers, superior equipment, better training, and vastly more resources. By every conventional measure, the colonists should have been crushed within months. The display showed maps of battles, troop movements, and strategic positions. The colonists won by refusing to fight on British terms. They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and knowledge of local terrain. They avoided pitched battles where British discipline and firepower would dominate. They targeted supply lines and isolated units. They turned their weaknesses, lack of formal training, irregular forces, limited resources, into advantages by adopting a style of warfare their enemy wasn't prepared for. Vreshtala found herself completely absorbed. This was unlike any military history she'd studied. Most species' military evolution followed predictable patterns: development of better weapons, stronger armor, more effective formations. But humans seem to approach warfare as an intellectual puzzle, constantly finding new solutions to overcome disadvantages. Here's another example, Chen continued. During World War II, one of the most devastating conflicts in human history, a relatively small island nation called Japan fought against the United States, which had vastly superior industrial capacity and resources. Japanese forces couldn't match American firepower or production, so they developed tactics that maximized the impact of every soldier and every weapon. They used terrain to their advantage, created elaborate defensive positions, and employed what we now call defense in depth, multiple layers of fortifications that forced attackers to fight for every meter of ground. The hologram showed detailed diagrams of defensive positions that Vreshetala had to admit were ingeniously designed. The cost to capture some islands was so high that it forced the Americans to reconsider their entire strategic approach. That's another lesson humans have learned repeatedly. The side that wins isn't always the strongest, but the one that makes victory too expensive for their opponent to pursue. A Zathian cadet, whose species were known for their advanced technology and had joined the Alliance centuries ago, asked, "But in modern warfare, particularly space combat, don't these historical examples become irrelevant? Ship-to-ship combat is determined by reactor output, shield strength, and weapons range. There's no terrain to use for advantage, no supply lines to raid. It's pure technological superiority." Chen shook his head slowly. That's what everyone thought in the frontier skirmishes last year. A human destroyer group encountered a pirate fleet with twice as many ships, each one roughly equivalent in firepower. By conventional thinking, the human ships should have either retreated or been destroyed. Do you know what actually happened? The lecture hall was silent, every cadet waiting for the answer. The human commander analyzed the enemy formation and realized the pirates were overconfident. They'd spread out to envelop the human ships, expecting easy prey. The human commander ordered his ships to concentrate fire on one section of the enemy formation, punching through their line. Then, instead of engaging in a running battle they couldn't win, the human ships went into a high-speed run directly through the center of the enemy formation. Document 3. Chen manipulated the holographic controls, and the display showed a tactical replay of the battle. Vreshetala watched as the human ships performed what seemed like a suicidal maneuver, diving straight into the midst of the enemy fleet. But as the simulation played out, the genius of the tactic became apparent. The pirates had to be careful with their fire to avoid hitting each other, Chen explained. The human ships were moving too fast for the pirates to coordinate their attacks effectively, and by staying in close, the humans negated the enemy's numerical advantage. They'd turned a space battle into something resembling close-quarters combat, where superior numbers meant less than positioning and timing. The simulation showed the human ships wreaking havoc as they moved through the enemy formation, their weapons firing with precise coordination. The human commander also did something unexpected. He transmitted a surrender offer in the middle of the battle, giving the pirates a way out before they sustained catastrophic losses. Half the pirate ships broke formation and fled. The rest were so disorganized that the human ships were able to defeat them in detail. Pelvar's voice carried a note of genuine admiration. That's brilliant and insane in equal measure. The risk was enormous. But calculated, Chen responded. The human commander had assessed his options, determined that a conventional engagement was unwinnable, and chose the one approach that gave him a chance. He also understood the psychology of pirates. They're opportunists, not true military forces. They fight when they have overwhelming advantage, but they're quick to abandon a battle that's going badly. He exploited that. Instructor Quintel moved back to the center. This brings us to perhaps the most important aspect of human military effectiveness, and one that makes many species uncomfortable. Humans have an exceptional capacity for controlled violence, not mindless aggression or bloodlust, but the ability to inflict maximum damage with precision while maintaining complete discipline and tactical awareness. The statement hung in the air. Vreshetala noticed that some of her fellow cadets looked disturbed by this characterization. The instructor continued. Most warrior species have evolved mechanisms to limit intraspecies conflict. The Korathi have ritual combat that rarely results in death. The Tenthari have social hierarchies that establish dominance without requiring lethal force. The Dracovians have territorial instincts that prevent overcrowding and reduce conflict. But humans evolved as persistence hunters and tribal competitors. Their capacity for organized violence is untempered by biological limiters. Chen picked up the thread. What the instructor is trying to say, perhaps more diplomatically than I might, is that humans are very good at warfare because we've had to be. We evolved in a relatively dangerous environment, competing with other predators and with each other. Our ancestors who couldn't organize, couldn't plan, and couldn't execute complex group tactics didn't survive to pass on their genes. Natural selection didn't just favor intelligence in humans, it favored the kind of intelligence that helps you outthink and outfight your enemies. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. But here's the critical part that many species misunderstand about humans. Yes, we're capable of extreme violence. Yes, we have a long history of warfare. But we also have extremely strong ethical frameworks and cultural values that govern when and how that capacity for violence is employed. Human military training doesn't just teach us how to fight, it teaches us when to fight, why to fight, and when not to fight. A new image appeared on the display, showing what appeared to be rules or guidelines. These are the human laws of armed conflict, derived from centuries of hard lessons and moral philosophy. They govern everything from the treatment of prisoners to the protection of civilians. Human soldiers who violate these laws face severe punishment, up to and including execution in extreme cases. We don't just train our soldiers to be warriors, we train them to be warriors with honor, discipline, and ethical constraints. Vreshatala raised a claw, hesitantly. Sergeant Chen, may I ask a question that might seem offensive? Go ahead, Cadet. I'd rather answer a difficult question than leave a misunderstanding in place. She gathered her thoughts. Your species clearly has exceptional military capabilities, refined through thousands of years of conflict. But doesn't that make humans dangerous to the Alliance? If humanity is so effective at warfare, what prevents them from using those capabilities against their allies once you've learned all our tactical systems and defensive capabilities? The question created an uncomfortable stir among the cadets. Some looked shocked that she'd asked so directly, others nodded as if they'd been wondering the same thing. Chen's expression didn't change, but Vreshatala thought she saw approval in his eyes at the directness of the question. That's not offensive, Cadet. It's a legitimate strategic concern, Chen replied, and it deserves a thorough answer. First, humans understand that we benefit enormously from Alliance membership. We gained access to technologies that would have taken us centuries to develop on our own. We've established trade relationships that have improved quality of life across Earth. We've learned from species who have solved problems we're still struggling with. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, betraying the Alliance would be foolish. He moved closer to the holographic display, highlighting Earth's position within Alliance space. But more importantly, human culture has a concept we call social contracts. We believe that groups of people, or in this case species, agree to certain rules and obligations that benefit everyone. When you join our military, you swear an oath to protect the Alliance and its member species. For a human soldier, that oath is sacred. Breaking it would be a fundamental betrayal of everything we claim to value. Quintel added, it's also worth noting that the Alliance has extensive safeguards. Earth doesn't have autonomous military authority. All major military actions require Alliance approval. Human forces train with and alongside soldiers from dozens of other species. This integration means we understand each other's capabilities and limitations, which builds trust. And perhaps most importantly, the Alliance maintains its own oversight and intelligence services that monitor all member militaries for signs of hostile intent. Pelvar raised a massive hand. But what about the economic factors? Earth has significant material wealth and industrial capacity. Some species have worried that humans might decide they don't need the alliance and could do better on their own. Chen's laugh was genuine this time. Anyone who thinks that hasn't been paying attention to human history. Yes, Earth has resources and industry, but we're also dealing with climate damage from centuries of industrial pollution, social inequalities that create internal tensions, and numerous other problems that benefit enormously from alliance expertise and support. Humans aren't stupid enough to throw that away for some fantasy of complete independence. He became more serious. Besides, humans have learned the hard way that isolation is a dead end. Every time a human nation tried to go it alone, to reject cooperation with others, it eventually failed or stagnated. The most successful periods in human history have been when we opened ourselves to exchange of ideas, trade, and cultural interaction. The alliance represents that principle on a galactic scale. The lecture hall's atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The initial skepticism about human capabilities had transformed into something more complex, a mixture of respect, caution, and genuine curiosity. Vreshatala found herself reconsidering not just her tactical assumptions, but her entire understanding of what made a military force effective. Instructor Quintel brought up a new display showing training exercises. Let's examine some specific examples of how human tactical thinking has influenced Alliance military doctrine. 6 months ago, Alliance forces were engaged in a peacekeeping operation on Thalara 4, where civil conflict had destabilized the planetary government. Traditional Alliance approach would have been to establish secure zones and gradually expand control, a process that typically takes months or years. The display showed troop movements and zone control maps. Human advisors suggested a different approach based on what they call clear hold build doctrine. Instead of just establishing military control, forces would secure an area, immediately establish visible security presence with local cooperation, and then rapidly deploy civilian reconstruction teams to restore basic services. The goal was to demonstrate tangible improvements in people's lives, thereby building popular support and denying insurgents the grievances they exploited for recruitment. Chen nodded. It's a strategy humans developed during counterinsurgency operations on Earth. The key insight is that military force alone rarely solves conflicts that have underlying social, economic, or political causes. You need to address those root causes while providing security. It requires coordination between military forces, civil administrators, engineers, medical personnel, and local leaders. It's complex and difficult, but it works. The display showed outcome data, reduction in violence, improvement in local conditions, and increased cooperation from civilian populations. The results were impressive. Vreshtala made notes in her datapad, recognizing that this approach could be valuable in numerous scenarios. A Quillarian cadet, whose species were renowned philosophers and had joined the Alliance primarily for intellectual exchange rather than military protection, asked quietly, "Sergeant Chen, do humans ever question whether warfare is necessary? Your species has clearly mastered it, but have you considered that there might be better solutions to conflict?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "All the time, cadet, all the time. Most human soldiers I know would rather find peaceful solutions to conflicts. We're not mindless warmongers who glory in violence. But humans have also learned that there are individuals and groups who will use force to take what they want, and sometimes the only way to stop them is with force. We have a saying, si vis pacem, para bellum. It's in an ancient Earth language called Latin, and it means, if you want peace, prepare for war." He paused, his gaze distant. Every human soldier carries the weight of their actions. We're trained to minimize casualties, to protect civilians, to offer surrender when possible, and to show restraint even in combat. But we're also trained to be absolutely ruthless when necessary. It's a difficult balance, and it takes a psychological toll. Human veterans often struggle with what we've done, even when we know it was necessary and justified. The raw honesty in Chen's voice created a moment of profound silence. Vreshetala realized that she was seeing a side of humanity that wasn't often discussed: the cost of maintaining such effective military capabilities. Quintel spoke gently. Which brings us to our final topic for today. Humans have contributed something to the Alliance that goes beyond tactical innovations or combat effectiveness. They've brought a perspective on the ethics of warfare that has enriched our understanding of military service. The display changed to show text, apparently quotes from human military philosophy. Humans have extensive traditions around concepts like just war theory, rules of engagement, and the moral responsibilities of soldiers. They've thought deeply about when warfare is justified, how it should be conducted, and how to maintain humanity even in the midst of violence. This philosophical framework is now being incorporated into Alliance military training across all species. Chen added, "In human military academies, we study not just tactics and strategy, but also ethics and history. We learn about mistakes our predecessors made, atrocities that were committed, and wars that should never have been fought. We study these not to glorify them, but to ensure we don't repeat them. Every human officer is trained to refuse illegal orders, even from their superiors. We're taught that following orders is important, but following our conscience is more important." Vreshetala found herself deeply moved by this. Her own species had a proud warrior tradition, but it focused primarily on martial prowess and tactical skill. The idea that a soldier's moral judgment was as important as their combat effectiveness was relatively new to her. As the lecture wound down, Chen made one final point. "I want to leave you with something to think about. When you assess any military force, whether human or otherwise, don't just look at their weapons, their physical capabilities, or their technology. Look at their training, their doctrine, their leadership, and their values. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the biggest gun. It's the one who knows exactly when and how to use every tool at their disposal, who can adapt to changing circumstances, and who remains disciplined and focused even under extreme stress." He swept his gaze across the assembled cadets. "Humans aren't superior to other species. We have our weaknesses and limitations just like everyone else. But we've had thousands of years to learn hard lessons about conflict, and we've paid for that knowledge with blood. What we offer the Alliance isn't just combat capability. It's institutional knowledge about warfare that can help all of us be more effective and more ethical in how we handle conflicts." Instructor Quintel concluded the session. "Your assignment for next week is to select a major human military engagement from the database and analyze it using Alliance tactical frameworks. Identify what was uniquely human about the approach, what could be adapted for use by other species, and what ethical considerations were involved. This analysis is due at the start of next week's session. Dismissed." As the cadets began filing out, Vreshetala remained seated for a moment, her mind working to process everything she'd learned. She watched as several cadets approached Sergeant Chen with follow-up questions, and she noticed the patience and thoughtfulness with which he answered each one. This wasn't someone trying to intimidate or impress. This was an experienced professional sharing knowledge with the next generation. Pelvar nudged her as he stood to leave. "Well, that's certainly changed my perspective. I'm starting to think humans might be the most dangerous species in the Alliance after all." Vreshetala's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Not dangerous. Formidable. There's a difference. Dangerous implies unpredictability or malice. Formidable means worthy of respect and caution. After today, I think humans have earned both." As they exited the lecture hall, Vreshetala couldn't help but think about the initial question that had sparked such an illuminating discussion. What was the body count of a single Earth Marine? Chen had deflected the question, but in doing so, he'd given a far more important answer. The true measure of a soldier wasn't how many enemies they'd killed, but how effectively they could accomplish their mission, protect their comrades, and maintain their principles even in the chaos of combat. By that measure, humanity had proven itself worthy of standing alongside any warrior species in the galaxy. And that, Vreshtala realized, was far more impressive than any number could ever be. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.